Today we're going to talk about page design, and the majority of what you're going to learn today speaks directly about yearbook design, but in our case it can also work for magazine or news magazine design. So a lot of the elements you're going to learn for yearbook design will also work for our newspaper, The Clipper. So we will be looking at different page layouts and talking about the different elements that go into play when you're deciding where to put images, where to put text on a yearbook page or a newspaper magazine page. So the first thing that you need to understand is that when we are looking at a yearbook page, we're actually looking at two different pages. We're looking at a left page and a right page. And what connects those is the gutter. So this is the gutter right here. That's where the pages are sewn together. You can put pictures across the gutter, but you should not put text across the gutter. And the reason that you don't want to put text across the gutter is when they sew the book together, you will lose part of your text inside that gutter right there, okay? Also, when you are placing a picture across a gutter, you want to make sure that nobody's face is directly on the gutter. If somebody's face is on the gutter, you lose part of their face. You might lose their nose, or you might lose one eye. And so it doesn't show the whole face and it makes the picture look odd. So you want to make sure that you keep text out of the gutter and you keep people's faces out of the gutter. Another thing you'll notice is that this page is a combination of grids. It's got a grid background. So you have rows and then you have columns. So the columns go up and down, the rows go side to side. Each column and each row is also separated by this tiny amount of space right here, this little line that is called a pica. And a pica is 1/6 of an inch. So that's what separates the columns. You notice it also separates the rows. So the first thing you want to put on your page is a dominant image, and that'll be a picture. Notice how this picture goes across the gutter, but nobody's head is in the gutter. So they've placed this here well. And a dominant image should always be close to, but not exactly in the middle. So if you look at this, it looks close to the middle, but you have a little bit more space at the bottom than at the top, and you have a little bit more space on the right than you do on the left. Your dominant image should also be at least 2 times bigger than any other element you put on the page. Any other picture or text, your dominant image should be at least 2 times bigger than that. It can be more than 2 times bigger, but it should not be less than 2 times bigger. Next, you'll want to make sure that you have an eye line. Now, for this particular page, we're putting our eye line under the dominant image because that's where we have more space. And what the eye line does is it creates unity between the two separate pages. So it shows that those two pages go together, and it allows your eye to read those two pages together. This eye line has 2 rows. Your eye line does not necessarily have to have 2 rows worth of space. It can be smaller than that. Then you want to start placing your text. Your text is going to go towards the outside of your pages, to the left, to the right, to the top, to the bottom. You don't want to place text in the middle of your design. And you want to make sure that as you start designing, you start in the middle with your dominant image and you work your way outward. You also want to make sure that you begin and end each element at the edge of a column. So you want a pica's worth of space between any of your elements right here. So you have a pica's worth of space between your story and your dominant image. You have your eye line between your story, your dominant image, and anything that comes below it. So that gives you an easy way to see the separation between the different elements on your page. Next, when you're placing your headline, you want to make sure that your headline always goes above your story. Now, it does not have to be just above your story. So you notice that this headline also goes over the dominant image. That's fine. But your headline always needs to be touching the story itself. You don't want to separate your headline from your story. Then you can start adding other elements, adding more pictures to your page. Now notice, we said earlier that your dominant image needs to be at least 2 times bigger than any of your other images. It's more than 2 times bigger than these 3 images that we've placed here. Then you want to make sure that you add captions. We talked about how to write captions earlier this year, and we'll review that again later. But what I want you to notice here is that the captions are touching the pictures that they go with. So your captions are going to be much, much smaller. Remember, they're only 2 sentences plus your lead-in and your photo by. So they're going to be much smaller than the rest of your text, than your story or your headline. And they are also generally going to be in a smaller point font. But the big thing to notice about your captions is they have to touch the picture they're talking about. So if you see these 2 captions right here, you know that they have to be about this picture and this picture, because those are the only pictures those 2 captions touch. This caption right here could not be your caption for your dominant image because it's too far away. So going back to these 2 captions, we know that this first one right here has to relate to the dominant image because that is the only caption touching the dominant image. We know that this caption right here, therefore, goes with the image above it. As for these 2 captions right here, this caption touches both of these pictures, but this caption does not. So we know that the caption right here has to go with the picture below, and the caption right here has to go with the picture to the side. Then we can start adding other elements to the page. And so some of these elements might include things like quote boxes with the picture of who said the quote, or you might end up with things like Viking voices, where we ask a question and we get an answer from a person from each grade. So notice that the text here is a little bit bigger than your story text or your caption text, but it's not quite as big as your headline text. We put quotation marks around it. We say who said it, what year they are, and then we have a picture of the person who said it that goes next to the caption, next to the quote itself. And then you might add a question and answer. We call these Viking voices, but this is where you ask a question and then you report the answer of different students. So notice that every single answer has a picture that corresponds with who said the quote itself. So the design that we just looked at is a traditional page design. It's a traditional yearbook page design. But there's another way to design called a modular design. Right here, the dominant image has been taken up by a module. So now instead of one picture, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pictures. That allows us again to cover more people than we would have in a traditional design. As you can see in this one, we've replaced the picture of this student pouring 2 different chemicals into this vial with 3 more pictures. So now we have even more coverage than we would have before. So sometimes the reason people choose to use modular design is because they want to cover more people. They want more coverage in their book. A reason that people might choose to use traditional design is because you have a cleaner page design and you are able to see more detail in some of the pictures that you use. So white space is important too. It's the area around the photos and the text, and it doesn't necessarily have to be white. Sometimes we put a color background to the page or a color background to a module. So white space simply refers to space that is not taken up by text or photos, by copy or photos. Planned white space organizes the content. It allows for a little bit of breathing room on the page, and it allows the viewer to see things a little bit more clearly. But unplanned white space can confuse the reader. We sometimes refer to that as trapped white space. So you want to make sure that your white space is used for a purpose. It's either dividing elements on the page or it's towards the outside of the page rather than the inside of the page. You don't want trapped white space. So there are 3 types of white space. There is standard spacing right here. This is a pica space, like we talked about earlier. So that's standard spacing where you put a pica between your different elements. Then you have tight spacing. So if you look at this photo box over here, between these 4 photos, there's less than a pica's worth of space. So sometimes you might use tight spacing, but you still have white space between your elements. And then you have extended spacing. So extended spacing or expanded spacing is more than 1 pica's worth of space. And it allows for a little breathing room on the page. It also allows you to be able to see certain things a little bit more clearly. So they wanted to have a drop quote right here, And you could not have that quote going over these pictures, so you needed a little bit of extra space here. So to summarize, if you put the whole page together, you can see how the different elements come together. So we have a headline right here, Smooth Moves, that is directly above the story. So it's touching the story that it's a headline for. Then we have our dominant photo. Now notice how they have a little bit of a cutout on their dominant photo that goes into both their text and into the expanded spacing right here, so you can see the hand easily. So our dominant image is at least 2 times bigger than any other picture, and it's close to the middle of the page, but not exactly in the middle of the page. Then we have content modules. You have one right here. You have one right here. So all of these pictures and this text go together for this content module and then for this content module. You've got your captions right here, and we know that our captions need to touch the pictures that they're talking about. And what you can't see because it's a little bit too small is that they've numbered the pictures, 1, 2, 3, and then if you got closer to the captions would also be numbered to help you figure out which caption goes with which picture. Then we have a quick read down here. We call them Viking voices, but you've got your question, you've got the picture of the person who's answering, and their quote is an answer. And within this quick read, we have standard spacing. So 1 pica's worth of spacing between the pictures and the text going here. We also have, we didn't really talk about this, but we have our folio. What our folio is it's our page number and any image that we choose to put with our page number to keep the theme going throughout the entire book. We also have our eyeline. We have our eyeline on both sides so you can see it's this white space that goes down here between all of the pictures and the content module at the bottom, the Viking voice at the bottom. And then we have an example of tight spacing right here. So again, we don't see any white space between these pictures right here, so that would be extreme tight spacing. And then we have our feature story right here, and our feature story has a pica space between the columns and a pica space between it and the pictures that go along with the page. In your next assignment, you are going to take a look at this yearbook page, and you are going to identify the different elements you learned about in today's PowerPoint on this yearbook page.